Diaz Spencer, a Mexican actor, portrayed Arturo Gallardo in Tierra de Reyes, a character driven by a passionate quest for justice following his sister's death. These episodes, part of a 160-episode series, produced by Telemundo Studios, a leader in Spanish-language television in the United States, were particularly intense. Notably, they featured extended scenes of Aaron shirtless and enduring tortures, emphasizing his robust physique at the age of 33. Aaron perfectly embodied the rugged, masculine ideal, suited for Arturo's role as a horse ranch worker. His visage was marked by a strikingly tough and assertive demeanor, underscored by steely, piercing eyes. The curly black hair, short beard, and mustache all contributed to an overwhelmingly powerful masculine presence. This appearance effortlessly captivated women, including Isadora, the trafficker's daughter. Unfortunately, this irresistible allure led to complications, drawing him into a web of trouble across these consecutive episodes. Aaron flaunted a physique that unmistakably reflected the rugged essence of a hard worker, densely packed with well-defined muscles. A lightly dusted layer of chest hair added a natural, masculine attraction to his broad, sculpted chest, frequently on display as he worked shirtless. This build clearly indicated a readiness to tackle any strenuous labor his role demanded, demonstrating not just aesthetic appeal, but functional strength to endure the tough predicaments he would confront. Arturo was initially abducted while trying to assist an individual with a car, a scenario orchestrated as a trap by thugs. Unaware of the deceit, he was knocked unconscious when a hidden assailant struck him on the head. He was then bound and thrown into a car. Upon regaining consciousness, he ingeniously freed himself and managed to disarm one of the thugs, nearly escaping. However, his attempt was abruptly halted when Isadora, intervening at a critical moment, shot him in the broad back with a stun gun, causing his second loss of consciousness and completely thwarting his escape. During his prolonged captivity in the abandoned cabin, Arturo managed to break free from his ropes once again and seized a gun from the thugs. As he confidently aimed the gun at them and backed towards the door, he was unaware of Isadora's presence behind him. She aimed her gun directly at the back of his head, setting the stage for another dramatic twist in his harrowing captivity saga. Nearly the end of his captivity, Arturo, together with Veronica, who came to his aid, managed to overpower Isadora and bind her, leading her out of the cabin. As they navigated through the woods, their escape was interrupted when the thug captured Veronica. With his gun pressed against her head, they demanded Arturo to drop his weapon. Faced with the immediate threat to Veronica's life, Arturo had no choice but to comply, dropping his gun and surrendering, which led him back into captivity again. During his extended captivity, Arturo faced various forms of restraint. Initially, after being knocked out, his wrists were tightly bound behind his back using strips of white cloth and rope, and he was placed in the back of a car. As the scene shifted to him, forcefully kicking open the back door of a van to confront the thugs, it was shown that, while he had managed to free his wrists, remnants of the restraints still lingered on one wrist. Following his second knockout, Arturo was restrained and placed in a more precarious position. His wrists were chained behind his back to a wooden pole, forcing him to remain seated inside an abandoned cabin. Additionally, Isadora blindfolded him with a black cloth, further complicating his situation and severely limiting his ability to explore the environment or strategize an escape. By the way, his legs were left unbound, granting him a small degree of movement. After being shot, Arturo was urgently moved to a table for resuscitation, where they first tended to his wound. Despite his injury, his captors displayed a stark lack of compassion, firmly binding him with both wrists and ankles, connected by a long rope in front. Even in his weakened and vulnerable state, they did not relent, choosing to keep him blindfolded as well. When Arturo managed to free his tied wrists and nearly escaped, his captors took even harsher measures to ensure it wouldn't happen again. This time, they did not leave any room for error. They chained his wrists together at head level and bound him facing a wooden pole. This new method of restraint demonstrated a deliberate increase in security and allowed Isadora to whip his bare back as punishment. Later, Arturo was placed on a table, and his wrists and ankles were chained separately, allowing him only slight movement. The long chains connecting his limbs were securely locked to the table, eliminating any possible escape. The design of these restraints ensured that he could only be freed by someone unlocking them. But the question remained: who would come to his aid? It was Isadora, who, swayed by Arturo's request, unlocked and released the chains connecting him to the table, allowing his arms to move freely enough to embrace her in an intimate affair. However, as Arturo attempted to suffocate her, the thugs immediately intervened, reattaching the chains to the table in a more restrictive manner. Arturo was repositioned, with his head hanging off the table edge, which left his chest fully exposed and vulnerable, increasing the intensity of his confinement and the control his captors wielded over him. The scene shifted away, suggesting prolonged torment. When it returned, his wrists were chained together in front of him and suspended from a long chain that hung from a wooden pole. Additionally, his ankles were also chained together, limiting his mobility further. This ensured that, while he could move his feet slightly and adjust his stance, he had no means of escape. The chains kept him in a standing position without the possibility of sitting down, greatly increasing the discomfort and severity of his captivity. In Arturo's final recapture, the captors imposed a particularly harsh restraint. He was bound upside down, with his wrists tied together in front, and both ankles were tightly roped and suspended high above him. A thug controlled his position by holding a long rope, pulling him up and down. This punitive and disorienting method of suspension not only intensified his physical discomfort, but also penalized him for his previous successes in eluding captivity. Finally, Isadora and her men inadvertently made a critical mistake. They bound Arturo's wrists together behind his back, and similarly tied his ankles, but they used rope instead of chains, marking a return to a less secure method of confinement. Arturo was left lying on the cabin floor, a position that seemed intended to degrade him. However, it allowed him more freedom of movement, presenting him with a potential opportunity for escape. This oversight ultimately led to Arturo freeing himself and Veronica. When Arturo regained consciousness in the cabin, after his second blackout, he found himself bound in a sitting position and blindfolded. Unable to see, he was vulnerable to a thug, who suddenly kicked his free leg, causing him sharp pain, as a form of cruel teasing. Later, still blindfolded and unable to defend himself, he didn't see the assailant, who shot him in the shoulder, causing significant blood loss that led to yet another loss of consciousness. The shooter was Leonardo, the true mastermind behind the scheme. Following Arturo's failed first escape attempt in the cabin, Isadora harshly punished him. She brutally whipped his back, each strikes a sharp reprimand for his defiance. In a further display of dominance and cruelty, she aggressively pulled his curly, beautiful hair, forcing his head backwards to ensure he was fully attentive to her angry words. This painful and humiliating treatment underscored her fury and desire to assert control over him. Exhausted and thirsty from his prolonged torment and restraint on the table, Arturo desperately needed water. Recognizing his vulnerability, one of the thugs attempted to hydrate him, but did so with cruel indifference, carelessly pouring a bottle of water into his mouth. The rush of water led to aspiration, causing Arturo to choke, cough, and gasp for air. The thug then emptied the remainder of the bottle, allowing the water to spill over his face and bare chest, showing no mercy as the liquid spread, adding to Arturo's discomfort and humiliation. As a punishment for his attempt to suffocate Isadora, the thugs forced Arturo into a vulnerable position with his head hanging off the edge of the table, causing his chest and abdomen to be fully extended upwards. In this exposed and defenseless state, one thug delivered harsh blows, slamming his fist into his abdomen. This brutal act of retaliation was meant to hinder him further and reinforce their control through physical domination. After Arturo's last escape attempt with Veronica failed, his captors imposed a severe and punishing measure to deter any future efforts. He was bound upside down and slowly lowered his head into a tank of water repeatedly. This terrifying form of torture submerged him until he could no longer breathe, exhaustively weakening him both physically and mentally. As he gasped for air, the message was clear: any further attempts to escape would be met with even more ruthless consequences. Finally, in a desperate and malicious act, the captors left Arturo and Veronica bound inside the cabin and set it ablaze, intending to eliminate them in a fiery death. As the flames grew, the heat and smoke began to suffocate them, creating a dire and almost impossible challenge before their final escape at the last minute. When the thugs first transferred Arturo to the abandoned cabin, they left him in his original clothing. However, after Leonardo shot him, the situation necessitated immediate medical attention. To effectively tend to his wound and perform resuscitation, they cut away his inner t-shirt and leave him shirtless later. Arturo's impressive physique was deliberately showcased throughout his prolonged captivity and the ensuing torments. Particularly in the scene where he was placed on a table, his body ensnared by large, visible chains. This not only served to emphasize his vulnerability and the extent of his physical restraints, but also highlighted his muscular build, creating a vivid juxtaposition of strength and confinement. This muscles and manacles display was clearly designed to captivate both Isadora's attention and that of the audience, turning Arturo's ordeal into a spectacle of physical endurance and visual drama. Throughout his prolonged captivity and relentless torments, Arturo's indomitable spirit was consistently evident. Despite being gradually weakened and exhausted by the constant physical and psychological strain, his strong will to fight, resist, and seek escape never waned. His manly resilience, in the face of overwhelming adversity, underscored his character's unyielding determination to overcome and survive against all odds. Arturo persistently tested and bucked against his restraints, even though he knew it was impossible to break free from the chains. The loud clanking of the metal only intensified his efforts. He resisted and fought back at every opportunity, asserting his defiance even when tightly restrained, by spitting at the thugs and Isadora. This act was not just a demonstration of his refusal to submit, but also a way to express his contempt and determination to maintain his sense of self, no matter how constrained. When Isadora attempted to seduce him, Arturo quickly seized the opportunity, cunningly persuading her to loosen the chains that securely bound him to the table. Once his arms were partially freed, he immediately utilized his regained mobility and considerable strength to suffocate her. Despite not being fully liberated from his bonds, Arturo's resourceful use of his limited freedom and physical power exemplified his relentless determination to resist his captors at every possible turn. Whimpering was never an option for Arturo, even under the most severe circumstances. When Isadora severely whipped him, or when a thug brutally struck his abdomen, he responded, not with signs of weakness, but with manly screams and grunts. Each sound he made was laden with endurance and a display of his superb toughness. These vocal expressions were not only indicative of the intense pain he endured, but also a testament to his unyielding spirit and resilience. In his final bid for freedom, Arturo made a harrowing choice, willingly enduring excruciating pain for a sliver of hope to escape. With his wrists still tied, he deliberately placed them into a blazing flame, believing that burning through the bindings would grant him the opportunity he desperately needed. This act of extreme courage and desperation underlined the intensity of his desire to be free, illustrating his readiness to face severe pain as a necessary sacrifice to regain his liberty. Arturo's repeated successes in breaking free from his bonds confirmed his exceptional skill and cleverness in overcoming challenging situations. His keen fighting instincts and tactical acumen allowed him to explore and test every possible avenue for escape, constantly assessing and manipulating his environment to his advantage. Despite the thug's efforts to reinforce the methods of restraint to ensure his continued captivity, they failed to learn from their past mistakes. The simple ropes they used were consistently insufficient to contain a man of Arturo's resolve and resourcefulness. His ability was not just physical strength, but also cleverness. He cunningly tricked Isadora into releasing his supposedly unbreakable restraints, exploiting her trust and turning the tables in his favor. Finally, in a desperate and calculated move, he chose to endure the excruciating pain of fire, to burn through the ropes binding his wrists. This painful sacrifice was crucial in securing his freedom and Veronica's. His ability to endure and strategically assessed the situation under extreme duress, culminated in their dramatic escape in the closing moments, underscoring his mastery over his fate. From the initial attack that rendered Arturo unconscious, to the numerous successful escapes and subsequent recaptures, culminating in his final liberating effort, the total duration of these scenes extended beyond 1 hour. This surprisingly long sequence of capture and torment was rare in mainstream media. However, Aaron's portrayal, which perfectly encapsulated masculinity in its prime, was ideally suited to meet the demands of Arturo's role. His performance not only captivated Isadora within the narrative, but also gripped the audience, drawing them into the intense emotional and physical struggles faced by the character.